Today, I asked ChatGPT its best 5 web development tips, and its answers might just surprise you. Number 1, keep your code organized and easy to read. Use clear, descriptive variables and function names, and use comments to explain what your code is doing. So, generally, I think that is a pretty good tip number 1 for this, as I think that it is so easy to just think, oh, I'm going to write this code and then we'll make it look cleaner in the future. We'll make it look better then. And when do you do that? Almost never. And as much as I say that I'm going to write something a little bit dirty at first and then clean it up later, I think maybe all of us have thought that and then not gone back and done it. And then it just leads to your code being far less maintainable and scalable, and it makes it harder to understand for other developers on your team. And over the long run, it just makes things tricky. So I think keeping your code organized, using a consistent file structure and naming conventions is definitely a good approach. And I understand that the more I get into my development career. And I think maybe when I was just starting out in those first kind of couple of years, I was like, why does any of this matter? Doesn't it just matter that my code runs and then it works? Yeah, kinda. But what is really going to make your code extensible and readable and maintainable, which, as I said, the more experienced I get, the more important I think that is. All this is important. So yeah, use clear descriptive variables. So really try to make your variables descriptive for what the value is going to be. I think that can definitely help. And then also same thing with your function names. And for comments, I think that it's important to find a good balance of comments in which I wouldn't write so many comments in which you are just kind of dirtying up your code and adding a bunch of clutter. But if you're ever doing something that's fairly complex, or it's kind of hard to structure it in a way that is just readable the way that you write that code, then I definitely think writing a comment to explain what you're doing is not only going to help future developers and other people looking at this code, but it's probably going to help you come back to debug this code. So I think that can be definitely useful there. Number 2, use version control such as Git to track changes to your code and collaborate with other developers. So yes, I think that is very helpful. Most of you are probably familiar with Git and GitHub, so I'm not going to go into it too much, but it's basically a way, like it said, to track changes to your code so you can kind of go back in time, or you can kind of cherry pick different commits and stuff like that. And it definitely allows a lot of collaboration. And GitHub is this remote repository that you can use to collaborate on your code base at once. So I think that is definitely useful. Number 3, test your code frequently, both manually and with automated testing tools. This will help you catch and fix bugs early on. And I also think that this is a good tip here, in which I think that when you are solving a problem, I think the best approach is to solve that problem iteratively as you test. So it's all right, well, let's say I have this somewhat larger problem. How can I break this down into smaller problems and then test each one of those steps that it works? So let's say that you are writing a function that is going to make a request to an API to get some data, and then you need to loop over all of that data to get the sum of all of the items in a cart or something like that. Well, your first approach might be to, all right, well, let's write a function that just hits this API and gets some sort of request. Okay, so you could write that function and you can just confirm and manually test, okay, it hits this API, I get some sort of response. And then you can test, okay, now that I have my API key in place and I can indeed send a request to this API, then your approach might be, okay, am I getting the right things back? And test that you're getting the right things back. And then once you know you are getting the correct things back, then you can be all right, I just need to loop over this data. Okay, test that you are looping over your data. So maybe in every loop, you console log. I'm a JavaScript developer, so that's what I would do. But you can debug that you are indeed looping over all of your data as expected. And then you need to get some information specifically from that data. So you can dive into that data a little bit more and decide, okay, how do I access the cart value for this data? And then you can do that, and then so on and so forth. So I think iteratively breaking these problems down and testing them manually as you go, rather than just writing this function all at once and then just trying to like debug it all at once, I think that usually is a suboptimal approach. And I think it's much better to frequently go over your code and iteratively test it as you kind of solve these problems. And I think automated testing tools is really helpful as well. So like, for example, we use Cypress, and every time that we push a new deployment or we push a new PR, we have this testing suite that automatically runs for every PR. And we have to make sure that those automated tests all pass before we merge that PR, which gives us a lot of confidence that with every new PR that we make or every new change that we make to our code base, we're not breaking a whole bunch of stuff. So I think that is a great tip there. Number 4, optimize your website for performance by minifying your code, compressing images, and using a content delivery network or a CDN. I absolutely agree with this tip as well. Most of the time when you create a production build, it's automatically going to kind of minify your code. So that is often going to kind of come out of the box in a lot of different frameworks and stuff like that when you create a production build of your code. So usually you don't need to worry about that one too much. But I would say for compressing images, that can definitely be helpful. I know that like for us, we were using some huge images and trying to ship those all at once. And when we compressed those, we definitely saw some performance gains. And a tip for measuring the performance of your website is using a free tool from Google Chrome called Lighthouse. And that will give you different metrics like first contentful paint and how long your thread is like blocking the user from using your website and different things like that that can really help you drill into how like responsive your website is and how good it is when it comes to the performance of your website. So that is a good tool. Usually Lighthouse will give you like, hey, maybe you try to compress these images, or maybe you try to minify your code a little bit more, or maybe you use a content delivery network, which basically will put your code closer to your user, which will help kind of ship it a little bit faster, or at least that's my oversimplified version of that. So I think this is also a very good tip. And for me, I like using Lighthouse to see those different metrics. And you can see that in your inspector. So if I go to inspect here, and then if I go to Lighthouse, I could analyze my page load here, and it will give me a lot of different kind of performance metrics and stuff like that on performance, accessibility, SEO, and just a whole bunch of different stuff that can help you write better code. And especially from like a Google standpoint for SEO and stuff like that. So that can definitely be a useful tool for you. But number 5, stay up to date with the latest web development technologies and best practice by regularly reading blogs, following industry leaders on social media, like your boy. Nah, I'm just kidding. I've got like 1,000 subscribers. I don't think I'm a industry leader here, but we're going to get there. And participating in online communities. So yeah, I think that this is also a great tip. I think technologies are changing all the time. Like I just generated 5 pretty dang solid web development tips here using artificial intelligence, which is kind of awesome. And I think that as we go, there are going to be more and more web development specific tools created by artificial intelligence that you're going to need to stay on top of. And I think it's going to get easier and easier for developers to be more and more productive, which in some sense might mean less demand on developers if any single developer can kind of do this stuff. But I also think a bunch of new jobs are probably going to be created with these new development technologies and stuff. So I think staying up to date is really great. And, you know, me personally, I like following different people on social media, mostly through YouTube. And then also I really like following some different podcasts and just listening to those and kind of staying up to date with what's going on. So I definitely think this is an important tip, and I think it can help you stay super relevant as a developer. But let me ask ChatGPT just one last bonus question here, and let's ask it, what are some new development technologies a web developer should know about? So, you know, let's stay up to date here. Here are a few web development technologies that are gaining popularity and may be worth learning. JavaScript frameworks such as React and Angular, These frameworks make it easier to build complex interactive interfaces and stuff. So I would say for this one, yeah, that's true, but I'm not sure if React and Angular are like super new. I think that most people probably know of these when they're getting into programming stuff, but I still think React and Angular are two of the biggest ones. And it's important to stay on top of the changes in React and Angular if that's the kind of frameworks you like to use. Progressive web applications are applications that are installed on a user's device, work offline, and have native-like capabilities. They're becoming more and more popular. And yeah, I think these are really cool. It can almost allow you to have like pretty close to a mobile app when just creating a web app. So I think that staying up to date on what's kind of new with progressive web apps can definitely help. GraphQL is a query language for your API. It allows the client to request exactly what is needed. I actually am a super huge fan of GraphQL. I find it very intuitive and everything. So I really like it. So I think that staying on top of what's kind of new there with GraphQL can definitely be helpful. WebAssembly. So this is a new binary instruction format for a stack-based virtual machine. Those are a lot of complex words I don't really understand. It allows to run low-level code such as C and C++ on a web browser. It's a game changer for web development as it allows to run computationally intensive tasks in the browser. So I also think that this one is cool. I feel like there have been a lot of promises from WebAssembly that haven't necessarily been fulfilled yet, but it seems like it's getting better and better. So I definitely think for web developers, this is probably something to kind of pay attention to and at least stay on top of to some degree. Serverless architectures. With the rise of cloud computing, serverless architectures are allowing developers to build and run applications and services without the need for managing infrastructure. This can greatly reduce the cost and complexity of deploying and scaling web applications. I totally agree with this one as well. I think with the rise of things like AWS from Amazon and Azure from Microsoft and even some Google Cloud Platform stuff from Google, all of this I think makes it really easy to deploy and scale applications. And like I've used things like AWS as well as Firebase. I don't have much experience with Azure, but I know that for Firebase and AWS, they definitely can make it a bit easier to kind of scale things. And they definitely do reduce kind of the cost and complexity to some degree, at least in my opinion. So I think all these are solid examples of things for you guys to stay on top of. So hopefully you enjoyed these web development tips here from ChatGPT. I largely agree with them. And I think that this is some kind of solid tips here. So thanks for tuning in. And I'll see you in that next one.